Redeemer. Amen. So we've been walking through these stories of the resurrection. I've enjoyed watching some of these stories unfolding as we've looked at the Gospel of John in particular this year, and seeing what took place after Jesus rose from the dead is a reminder that God shows up, and God shows up sometimes in the most unusual ways, doesn't he? And as we enter this story today, and it's a familiar story probably to most of us, who have an awareness of the whole resurrection story in the Gospels. It's a story about Thomas. And yet it's not really just about Thomas. It's about me. It's about you. It's about all of us. And before I'm too quick to point to Thomas and say, Thomas, why didn't you believe? And then I could go back a few days earlier and say, Thomas, why weren't you there, right? As we hear John give this account that 8 days later after the resurrection, the disciples were gathered once again in this room behind locked doors. And Thomas, who was not there the first time Jesus appeared, was there this time. And it's easy, it is so easy for me to slip into that judgmental role. Why weren't you there? All the other guys and ladies were there. Thomas, why don't you believe all that he said? And yet as soon as I go there, it's like the pointing finger. How many fingers are pointing back, right? So we give Thomas a hard time, I think sometimes for doubting. And he's known as Doubting Thomas. Wouldn't that be an awful way to be known, right? Doubting Thomas. And yet as we put ourselves in the story, and I like to do that, I like to think about what it would be like to be in the midst of whatever's going on in these gospel stories, whether it's Jesus passing by or touching someone's blind eyes and they're opened, or Jesus speaking a hard word to bring people closer. I love to think about being a part of the story. And so as I think about being in that upper room or that closed room, I would love to know how Jesus came in, right? It just says, John just says he appears. And again, last week we kind of looked at a similar situation where Jesus just all of a sudden appears. How in the world? And as I put myself in that story behind closed doors, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? And I imagine these disciples who had walked through these days, and by this time it was a week later after the resurrection when Thomas does show up and Jesus appears again. I can imagine these disciples were still wrestling with a lot of stuff. Because boy, you put yourself in the story, a lot of things had happened in the course of those 2-3 weeks leading up to, and then the death, and then the resurrection. And before I'm too quick to point at Thomas and say, Thomas, why did you not believe? After all that Jesus had done and all he had said and all that was happening and you were hearing about him rising from the dead, why don't you believe? I'm there. How many times I catch myself doubting. I had a friend back at our church we were in Florida, and he came up to me one time, just kind of out of the blue. And he said, Pastor, I feel like I need to just tell you, I doubt. I struggle with doubt about God. I said, thank you for being honest. I said, I struggle at times too, and his eyes just got really big, like, really? Yeah. We all doubt. It's part of life. And we all want to see with our eyes. We all want to touch with our hands. We all want confirmation. And not just once, but over and over, we want confirmation, proof that this is for real. And as Amy shared with us in the children's message over and over again, whether we see it or even if we sense it, God's constantly at work around us. And God was surely at work in that moment as Jesus stepped into the room again. This past weekend, this is an ideal time of the year to get out in the yard, isn't it? I know I've got some fellow gardeners in the congregation that love to get out, root in the dirt, get out and do lawn work. And this week was no exception. Beautiful weather this weekend. Got out in the yard. Friday is typically my day off, just to unplug, do nothing churchy, right? And just be. And I'm sometimes good at that, sometimes not so good. So Friday, Rebecca and I have a standing date. My wife and I have a standing date. We go grocery shopping, and we see you guys out at the grocery store. And what we have to remember is that we're not in church, and that's hard. We're just out in the community. And we get to see folks out in the community and interact with everybody, and we go grocery shopping, and that's our date. We love to get together and do that. It's kind of nuts, but we love it. Come home, and then it's gardening work. Time to work in the yard. That night, Friday night, and again, I'm going to put a shameless plug in for it, the third Friday, the city of Warsaw gets together, just has a great time. This weekend, this third Friday, it was all about the Fat and Skinny Tire Festival, if y'all are familiar with that. Those of you coming in from out of town, this is just a huge bicycle race and an opportunity to throw a party and get everybody together and celebrate. And so Friday night, third Friday, every third Friday, there's a community worship service that takes place right down the road here at the Gathering Place. And if you're not familiar with the Gathering Place, Ministry of Fellowship Mission, I encourage you just to go. Step into that space. It's a beautiful space. So every third Friday we get together for worship. Well, this was third Friday. I was tired. How many of you after gardening, you're just tired, you're spent? And it was my day off. And this was sort of a churchy thing, right? On Friday night. And I started making all kinds of excuses why I shouldn't go. And they were very legitimate excuses. And part of the excuse that I was making is that I doubted many people would show up. Not that having a lot of people is really that important. I doubted that it would be something I would enjoy. True confession. And here's the kicker. I doubted that God would be present. Wow, really? I know, you're giving me that look like, really? And here, let me give some explanation. Because it was third Friday and there was a bicycle race happening around the Gathering Place. I do that. I still do that. And as I went through the day and as I got ready, because I thought, I'm just going to get ready. If I feel like going, I'll go. If I don't, I won't. And it got to the time, and you ever just feel like God needling you? Some of you do, apparently, because you're laughing. I thought, okay, I'll go. So I dragged my sorry little self over to the Gathering Place, and I walked in there. And I saw familiar faces in the community. I saw some folks from our church, and what a blessing that was to be able to see folks from our church at the Gathering Place. And I thought, okay. And as the night went on, and as worship happened, and it's a very unique experience there at the Gathering Place on third Fridays, I felt God's presence so tangibly in that space. And I had to kick myself and say, why did you doubt, right? And then I thought about the message today, and it's like, dummy? Gosh. You ever call yourself dummy? Dummy? Why do you doubt? And as I think about the importance of being able to gather together, I mean, how many of you guys woke up this morning? I mean, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you woke up and thought, oh, you know what I'm saying? Oh. You're thinking about all the things you got to do, right? You're thinking about all that's happening around you. It's early. It's like, oh. And yet you dragged yourself here, if that's the case. And my hope is, again, the children's message, my hope is that you sense God's presence as we gather together. How many times have I come to that time of prayer during the course of the day? And it's so easy to bypass that, right? And if you're in the habit of praying daily, you know the benefits of praying daily. But it's a routine, right, that you do. And sometimes it's easy to think, I've got all this stuff to do today. I'm going to bypass that because I've got a lot to do. And then you feel it. Now, as we enter into this room today with Thomas and the other disciples, there's some special things that are happening right now. There are reports that Jesus had been seen risen from the dead. But my goodness, the things that these disciples had just gone through, and I've mentioned that each time I've preached this particular series on the resurrection, I can't even begin to imagine just the devastation that they were feeling. And I can imagine not only the devastation that they were feeling, but the fear of what happened to Jesus was going to happen to them next. So I can understand why Thomas checked out, right? And I can understand why sometimes I and we check out, because life gets really hard sometimes, and we're just not feeling it. But here's the cool thing. A cool thing that we're reminded of today as we hear Jesus' words to Thomas is that even when we check out, please hear this, even when we check out, the grace of God through Jesus continues to call us to what? Continues to call us to know the love of God poured out in very tangible and real ways. I love that the gospel writer John says, you're blessed because you get to put your finger into the wounds of our risen Jesus. There's going to be a whole host of other people that will come generation after generation that hear the good news and respond to the good news that never get a chance to have that kind of tactile proof. But what they do have and what you and I have, I think, is so much more valuable. What is that? It's faith. It's faith that God is there in the midst of life's crappy times. It's faith that God will never leave us or forsake us. It's faith that God keeps drawing us. It's faith that God forgives us in times when I just can't do it and I want to check out. It's faith that God is more than able to do what only God can do in our lives. And so, Thomas, I'm sorry I doubted your doubting. I'm sorry I pointed a finger at you. I'm sorry that there's times I check out. I just don't have it. God, thank you that in spite of those times of doubt, and it affects all of us, that you, God, remain faithful to us and you continue to call us. This week we are wrapping up worship at the 11 o'clock service out at Joe's Kids. And for those of you who've been a part of Warsaw First United Methodist Church for any length of time, you have some history, right, of how all of that happened. And this season, as we've reflected on, I remember when we first came to Warsaw, and the pastor that was here before, Pastor Mark, on a phone call, he said, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. You know when you're a pastor coming into a church and the pastor that's there is saying, I just want to give you a heads up, you're in trouble. So I just want you to be aware that there's 2 campuses to this church, and it's not sustainable. He recognized that, even at that time. And so after much prayer, and I can't overemphasize the importance, even when it makes a lot of sense, here's what we need to do. I can't overemphasize the importance of prayer. After much, much prayer, conversation, town hall meetings, battles, sometimes, honestly, battles, we finally came to some agreement. We sold our second campus. And the people that bought the second campus, Joe's Kids, if you know anything about the work of Joe's Kids, they minister to children and families in the community by providing much, much needed therapies for children. And I can remember sitting in a prayer meeting out at what we called the Connection, the second campus, with a group of people just praying, God, show us what you have. And one of the people in the prayer group, he said, you know what, I envision this place being just filled with children Just children running around laughing, playing, and having a great time. And of course, we were thinking, because it was about us, we were thinking it was our church was going to explode with a lot of families coming in with children, and the place was going to be full of life. But that was not what God had in mind. But I love the fact that as we prayed with our hands, for the most part, open. I know sometimes I pray with my hands open and then I grab back, and then I open it and then I grab back. Oh, good. I'm glad there's others that do that too, that are laughing nervously. We prayed, God, have your way, whatever that looks like. And I can remember praying that prayer and thinking, ooh, because it may go a way that I'm not comfortable with. And as it became clearer and clearer that the church was not going to explode in growth with young families and children running around, but instead that we were going to be selling this property. And as Joe's kids purchased the property, and I was aware of the work of Joe's kids, I thought, okay, God, where are you going with this? And isn't that the way life can be? So many times. Boy, I've got it figured out. I know how things ought to go. And something trips it, messes it up. And I think I've got two different options here. I can go with that and say, okay, God, what are you doing? And be open to whatever God's doing. Or I can just grab hold and try to make something happen. And how many times I've done that? And all of that I say because I think that's where Thomas's mind was. And I think that's where a lot of the disciples' minds were at the time. I believe they had in mind how things should go, and it was just going off the rails. They were out of control. I don't know about you, but when you feel out of control, it's no fun. And sure, I'm going to say, yeah, unless I put my fingers in, unless I see what's going to happen. Thomas stopped doubting and believe. Believe in what? Believe that God is able, whatever it is. If you've got something going on in your world right now, and you feel like things are going off the rail, and you've been fighting hard to get it back, and nothing that you do seems to be working, it just, let me remind you that there's this thing called prayer. If you're not already praying and asking God, God, what are you doing? The psalmist was great at asking that question. What are you doing, God? And then being open to what God has. Stop doubting and believe. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It has everything to do with God. And me saying, God, I don't understand, but I put it all in your hands. And not just once, because I'll wake up the next day and I'll go back at it trying to make it work, right? But every day. God, what are you doing? What do you have? And then surrendering and laying it down. Boy, that's hard. Depending on how badly we want something to happen and we think it's so needed, it is so hard to lay it down. So stop doubting and believe, I think, is an invitation to just lay it there at the feet of Jesus, our risen Lord, who is more than able to walk us through whatever it is on the path that he has for us. Thomas said, my Lord, my God, when he was able to touch the nail prints, right? Thomas's eyes were open and he believed. But it took that connection, that physical connection with Jesus that we don't get to get in this world, to remind him. But guess what? We can have that connection, every single one of us. All we have to do is believe. But God, you know it's hard. You know it. So God, help us. Help those of us especially who are going through some really tough things right now, trying to make sense of, trying to make things happen. Help us, Lord. We believe. Lord, help our unbelief.